So, two great contributions there from Rome and from Mumbai. Has to be said, two men, but I'm delighted to say we've now got a panel which is all women. So I'm going to invite up onto the stage our three panelists. So panelists, please come up in the order I mention you. Julia Ries is head of the Brussels office of REWE, which is a German retail and food and travel giant in Germany, huge business in Germany. Poppy Eyre is a self-described future food maker. She is the innovation support officer at a project called Food Shift 2030. And I think it's fair to say that Poppy is one of the younger contributors here today at FFA, and we're delighted to have a younger contributor. Well, we've got two younger contributors, and we've got a third younger contributor. I'm getting myself into a terrible mess already with this. We've got a very young panel, is what I'm trying to say. Our third panelist is Cleona Howie Del Rio, and Cleona is CEO of Foundation Earth. So, Cleona, welcome, and please give all three of them a very warm welcome. So thank you, all three of you, for joining us. As is usual with our panels, we don't want a big sort of major set-piece speech from all three of you, but given what we're talking about, that is food pricing, the mechanisms to reflect true value, and to try to shift and transform our food production system so that it is so much more sustainable and delivering a healthier collection of human beings on this planet, give each of you in turn, just give me your opening thoughts on this whole sort of field of discussion. So, Julia, I'm going to ask you to kick us off.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here to share our view. Just a few words to REWE Group. We are a cooperatively structured retail and tourism group with headquarters in Germany. Our retail business is focused on food retail, and being a cooperative in this business means that we have our own stores, but we have, very importantly, independent retailers that run their own stores. And a little bit in that perspective also goes our approach to buying, which is, as a cooperative, we always prioritize, wherever this is possible, buying on a local level versus a regional level versus national versus international.
When you say you're a cooperative, you mean you're owned by your workforce, or what do you
Our
mean?
independent retailers own the business, and our independent travel agents in terms of the tourism.
I see.
So it's
I see.
cooperatively
Yeah.
structured. And when it comes to the true cost accounting at REWE Group, this has been part of the internal debate for a while, because we were wondering, what does that actually mean for our products? And here we, for a retail perspective, always have to distinguish between brands and our own retail brands, and on the latter we decide on content and marketing. And we were very keen on understanding how can we calculate this, because there's not an agreed legislated methodology out there. And what does it mean for our products, and ultimately what does that mean for us as REWE Group, and where should we be in this debate? So we reached out to a German expert, Dr. Tobias Gaukler from the University of Augsburg, and we asked him to make a study on a few of our products and to assess what is the additional cost here for those products. And in 2020, we presented that cost in one of our stores in Berlin, where next to the original price of the products, we showed the price increase of those staple goods. And we tried to educate consumers, so we had the possibility to guess first how much would the increase be, and then you see the real increase based on that methodology that we used. And we had three key takeaways that I would just like to start from the beginning. Is one, there was huge consumer interest. I think it really overwhelmed us, the interest from different stakeholders, from media. We're not that often in international media with REWE Group, because the REWE brand exists only in Germany. We have other stores outside of Germany.
Right.
And second of all,
Can I just stop for a sec? Because
Sure.
I'm not sure I completely understand. So you've got these products in your stores, and you've got the original price.
Yes, the price we're asking today, yeah.
And then you've got a price which is more the true cost price, if you were to
Exactly.
factor in all sorts of externalities.
Exactly.
But if a consumer buys the product, are they paying the original price, or are they actually paying the new price, which reflects a truer cost of the product?
In that, they were paying the original price.
Oh, so they're being told this is what it should cost, but this is what you're actually paying. But you're not paying it. You're not paying the true cost.
You're not paying it
They're
today.
not.
Exactly. It was about making that first step
I see.
towards starting that debate. So what are we actually talking about? What is the question that you asked? What are the price increases we would be talking about? And what does that mean for us as a consumer and for us as a society? And two further key takeaways in here is that while we can label it and while it shows the impact on where they are lying, it doesn't yet abandon those impacts. So we always will need to go a step further in reducing the impacts. And the third element we learned is that we're having, together with NGOs like NABU, I think the gentleman from BirdLife Europe was here, a long year project on biodiversity and conventional apple growing. And we've seen a lot of good results there in terms of biodiversity increase, and that also paid off in the true cost. So we see that where we already have projects in terms of sustainability, we can improve that performance on true cost. So we're not starting from scratch, because there's always that kind of paints a picture, we're not paying that yet, but there are many, many good projects out there that already make sure that those costs are internalized and that the impacts are lowered.
But is your message to your loyal customers that they should get ready, they should brace themselves for an end to the current cost and a rise in price to the real true cost of many of your products? Is that what you're trying to say to them by doing this dual price, where you have the price you pay but the price you actually should pay if true cost accounting were really applied to food? Are you trying to say to your customers, mentally prepare yourselves to pay more for food?
I think our message in this was really, we wanted to create transparency, that our consumption has an impact and that there is a lot to do in the supply chain, and that is also our responsibility, also as a retailer at the end of the chain, to look at our own brand product supply chains. And we need to have an overall societal solutions for that, because we are, and that was said before, we are in a way already as a society paying that price. We might not be paying it directly, but we are paying it via societal and governmental, support for water, exactly those elements. So it's not that it's not paid anywhere.
No, true. But no business can afford to go out on its own on this and nobody else follow them, because it would in too many cases mean that your prices became unacceptably high compared to those of your rivals down the road who aren't interested in reflecting true cost. And that would put you out of business if you did that on your own.
That's very true. I think in our view, we really are looking at this as an entire supply chain. I think we need to move towards that as a supply chain. We have a huge transformation objective for the sector, and as Dirk has also mentioned this earlier, where we work together with supply chain actors, with the entire chain, with some really good projects where we see immediate impacts, but it has to be the entire supply chain and everybody willing to invest on that. And this is also retailers. Retailers need to be willing to take their part in this and to also invest in this systemic change.
Indeed. So there's plenty of education needed there. Well, look, that's a great opening outline of something you've been doing, and that's terrific. So let's now go to Poppy. And Poppy, you were telling me a little earlier, we were chatting and you were talking to me about being a future food maker, and I wasn't quite sure what that meant, and you talked to me about the Food Shift 2030 project. So just explain to me how the work you're doing fits into this whole debate we're having.
Yeah, so just a bit about the Future Food Makers program. That was at the end of last year. For 2 or 3 months, I worked together with a group of young people from across Europe. We were a group of 10, and we took on the challenge to create a food systems manifesto. And I can't tell you how many Zoom meetings we spent going back in circles about the same topics. And in the end, we did come up with a manifesto. You can find it online. If you go to LinkedIn, you can search up Future Food Makers and it'll appear there. And we came up with 6 things we want to see in the food system, and one of those was true cost accounting. And I completely agree with you that even though maybe the cost we're paying in the supermarket at the moment isn't the true cost, we are already paying the true cost. And maybe we're not going to see it immediately today, but we will see it tomorrow. And my generation will definitely be seeing this. And actually, to get a feel for the room, there was a great statement made earlier in the first keynote presentation, this notion that I can't deal with another apocalypse today. You know, this doom and gloom feeling of, you know, the news is terrible, there's a war, the food prices are going up, climate change, not even going to think about that now. There's this horrible feeling, and I want to get a feeling in the room here, who can resonate with this? Who has woken up sometimes, read the news, and thought, okay, I feel this. Can we have a show of hands if anyone can resonate with this feeling? Okay, so here are all the cynics. Of you, who is under 25? Because I'm 23. I'm quite nervous to be up here in front of such an experienced group of people. Okay, so I do have a small team here, a small group of you. Thank you.
Yeah, but hang on. I don't think that's cynical, sometimes to feel that you can't deal with it all. It's just overwhelming and you can only deal with one thing at a time.
Yeah.
In a funny sort of way, it's the opposite of cynical, because you know there's a huge problem
Yeah.
there. You're not dismissing it. You're not saying, it's all bullshit, da-da-da.
Yeah.
You know it matters, and
Yeah.
you know you should care, but you just have so much bandwidth and you can't necessarily cope. So
Yeah.
I'm defending the olders and those who've just been labeled cynical. I'm not sure it's always cynicism. But anyway, carry on.
No, what I wanted to say, you're right. I mean, sometimes, I feel like, okay, this is a bit cynical to think about it like this, but it also does create a lot of inspiration. You know, it means there's a lot of stuff to fix, which might seem very intimidating, but it also means that we can have very purposeful work, and as a younger generation, we can make impact. And I think the people sitting here, the younger generation that just raised their hands, you're here for a reason. You want to see change, and I think you've been put now in a room with a very select group of people that might be able to help facilitate that change. And so I would like to ask, especially people in senior positions, where perhaps you have quite a broad sphere of influence, I really encourage you to talk to your younger generation neighbors and see how we can implement this. Because these young people are here for a reason, I'm here for a reason, and I can tell you this morning I woke up terrified when I thought, oh no, I have to speak to all of these people who have 20 years of experience in the sector, and what am I going to say? I'm going to say, can you help us? Because we need your help, and I think true cost accounting is one of the mechanisms that we can really make change. So I would really, really just plead for your collaboration and openness to the new generation, and that we can benefit from your experiences in all the generations.
But now I'm intrigued. I want to know what else was in your manifesto.
That was a lot.
Yeah, well, just
There
give us
was
a
a
few
lot.
more highlights.
So we had true cost accounting was a big one. We also had that we want at least 25% of land managed under regenerative practices. My personal opinion is that should be much higher. 25% seemed like a pill that could be easily swallowed to some extent. I think it should be much more. We also talked about labeling in our manifesto, and a lot about education. And I think that, that's something that we can discuss endlessly, but the young generation is very aware of the issues going on in the world, and I think we should not only educate on what the issues are, but how we can fix them. And I would really like to advocate for systemic thinking, systems thinking in that regard. And also to companies where you're offering internships, for example, that you're helping to educate younger generation in professional life and in careers, that you also welcome them to think systematically in your companies, and that you welcome them to challenge the status quo, because that's really going to be where the change is made.
Yeah, great. Well, I want to come back to some of the points you just briefly mentioned there, like labeling. That's an interesting one, and it goes back to what we were hearing this morning from Per, the Norwegian psychologist. I'm interested in all sorts of things. But I really want to bring Cleona in now. So Cleona, again, your task, don't give us like a 10-minute speech, but just give us some opening thoughts from your perspective on the debate we're having, and obviously particularly on sort of this whole question of price mechanisms and true pricing.
So no 10-minute speech.
Well, you can if you want, but
I'm already happy because you included me in this group of young people, so...
yeah.
I'm the CEO of Foundation Earth. Foundation Earth, I speak for Foundation Earth, as well as myself, of course. True cost accounting, we believe in science-based impact assessment to be able to generate data to be able to take some of those decisions that we're discussing today. And that data helps us inform decision-making at company level, policymaker level, and at citizen and consumer level. Without data, without good data, honestly, we're just talking to talk between ourselves and debate, which is healthy and good, but we have to have the facts. And we live in a society now of a lot of debate around what are the real facts and what is the real data. So Foundation Earth is an independent NGO saying that data has to be credible, it has to be transparent, and it has to drive change. Because there's data and there's data. And what we are doing and talking about labeling, we are bringing a label to the food industry, food and drink industry. We're doing it with a different type of vehicle. So it's not a government label, it's not an industry-led label, and that's for certain reasons around credibility, transparency, but also by taking action now. As Poppy's saying, we need action now. We need to help people out there now. People do want to know. We can talk all day about human psychology in a label, but if we don't generate the data and present it in a way that's credible and transparent, then we're just talking psychology for the sake of talking psychology. We also can't label for the sake of labeling. We have to understand what the drive is, what the objective is. And it has to be a systemic, holistic approach around the label. A label's only as powerful as we enable it to be. So we have to look at the science, of course, to make it science-based impact assessment. We have to look at the tech to make this scalable and accessible to all. It can't be an elitist thing. We have to look at education and awareness, right? You can combine a label with many other tactics to build awareness and education. You can redesign supermarkets. A lot of us shop online. You can add a lot of messaging in with that. We have to look at policy. We've talked about policy and what role the government plays in regulating. But what we do have to do is look at all those levers of change together simultaneously and trigger them all at once. Because otherwise we are just doing individual isolated activity mechanisms. We have to take the systemic approach. And Foundation Earth is driving that, but most importantly on true cost. We're driving this including Scope 3 emissions. So generating data that we already understand, we already know around Scope 1 and Scope 2 is not going to drive any kind of transformative change. We have to profile our Scope 3 emissions. We have to generate data around the Scope 3 emissions.
For those who aren't clear on Scopes 1 and 2, we're definitely not clear on Scope 3. So just give us a bit more detail on that.
So when we talk, let me simplify it. We talk about data, there's poor, average, good, and excellent data. So to be able to drive transformative change, for example, around the different metrics that we measure, when we say, let's measure our impact, we have to broaden out what we're measuring. And I had this discussion with someone today, say, is carbon accounting enough? No, it's not. We have to look at biodiversity impacts. We have to look at water impacts, water pollution, water contamination. I live in Spain. Spain is in trouble, let me say under trouble, that's bad English. We're in trouble right now because runoff, we have heavy rains, very little rain, and then very heavy rains, climate impact, of course. All the pesticides run into the water table, into the water basin. There are regions in Spain that you cannot and you should not drink water from the tap. This is a European country, this isn't a developing country. So we have to understand the full holistic impact of what we're drinking and eating, because it's a human rights issue as well as a issue around understanding the true cost. It's actually a human rights issue to have access to clean water. So to be able to understand the true cost, we have to have the true calculation of impact. Net positive, nature positive things will help that balance, bring balance into that impact. And again, that's part of what we need to measure. And it's very, very important, I think, to also say, it's come up many times today, about building incentives. If we're all here saying we don't like greenwashing, none of us like to be lied to. We want to trust, we want to believe. What's the opposite of greenwashing? Is giving merit where merit's due. But that has to come from a credible, transparent source that we can go to the supermarket and we can make a quick, enabled, simple decision, not carry out a PhD thesis every time we go into the supermarket, and say, I trust this source. I do want to buy, and the younger generation is saying this, I do want to know what I'm buying, but I want to believe and trust what I'm buying.
So tell me a bit more then about your specific labeling initiative. You're saying it's truly independent, it's not driven by government, it's not driven by the retailers or the food industry. You are coming up with your own independent labeling system. So who's using it, and what exactly is included in your labeling system?
Yep. Thank you. So there's three things that distinguish this labeling system. One is it's independent, as you mentioned, and we have an independent scientific committee. I don't have any say there at all, right, where there's independent experts. But we say this, I say this very humbly and very openly, where we look to other science. Science was missing this morning. We talked about a knowledge triangle: business, citizens or consumers, and government. What about science and research? That has to be brought into it. There are people who have done 50 years of research on impact assessment and knowing what the impact assessment is of our food industry. That has to be brought into it. What we knew about measuring biodiversity 6 months ago is not the same today, and it will change tomorrow. So we have to be able to adapt, adjust, and act to new knowledge, and that is bringing in science and researchers into the discussion, very important voice to have. Harmonization, right? Science, good science is based on a harmonized objective, meaning that if a poppy travels from Belgium to France tomorrow, she can recognize the label and say, I understand that and I trust it. It's also important for the science that we agree on the metrics, and we're not measuring different things in different places. Industry also demands this, by the way, because it's a huge admin and bureaucratic nightmare to have different regulation in different countries and go through all that every single time you're exporting somewhere new. Finally, what's really important is the data, so what we're measuring, right? The metrics, understanding the metrics, pushing for the broadest sense of impact assessment, also driving good data, saying what we call primary data, meaning not all apples are created equal, right? And so when we use secondary data, database data, saying that maybe have data on how apples are often cultivated, what's the average use of water to grow an apple? It's not actually the same. Not all apples are created the same, and not all apples are positive impact just because it's a fruit. So having that information will drive behavior change because we're informed. Most importantly, though, it will provide incentive upstream, right? We talked a lot today about the responsibility on consumers, but to drive responsibility across the whole value chain, but more importantly, to bring incentive in. So you imagine if you're a consumer and you're going to the supermarket now, and you have to do a PhD thesis to find a sustainable product that you can actually trust. What about going to the supermarket and saying, I know everything here, we've elevated sustainability across all product categories, and now I can go to the supermarket and I can choose between sustainable product A or sustainable product B.
Yeah, you put the onus on the supermarket rather than
No, not the
on
supermarket,
yourself.
the whole supply chain.
Yeah.
And bringing asset to where asset is merited, right? So what we're exploring, which is really interesting, which has not been explored before, is bringing a labeling system or a certification system throughout the whole supply chain and bringing merit where merit's due all the way down to farm level.
That's really interesting, and thank you very much for that, Cleona. So Julia, you work for a big retail operation. Are you a true believer in the difference labeling can make, and do you love the sound of what Cleona's talking about?
We would very much agree with the statement that there is a huge gap in the market, and it's been there for quite a while in terms of giving comparable, credible environmental impact information to consumers. We're present in several countries, and so far there's been a gap. So about 10 years ago, we came up with our own label, which is called the ProPlanet label. So we're looking at entire supply chains. We have an advisory board with NGOs, and we're looking at the hotspots in the relevant supply chain. And if we manage to alleviate those hotspots and to have more sustainable supply chain, then that product will get that ProPlanet label, and the consumer can check what has been changed here.
Right,
And
but
the fact that I take a lot of time to explain this already shows to you that this is not yet a perfect solution.
No,
It's
and I
filling
mean the point
gap.
is, Cleona's point is that in a way it'd be much better if you weren't doing it, but you sort of farmed out this whole labeling initiative to an independent group like Foundation Earth with their science advisors, because you have a vested interest. I mean, in the end, you know, you're a retailer. You're one part of the chain, and you have your own particular interest, which is to maximize, you know, the success of your own business. Whereas maybe you should be open to labeling that isn't your own ProPlanet initiative, but is actually Cleona's independent pro-planet initiative in the future?
So, I mean, that's why the ProPlanet obviously has also an independent advisory board to give that credibility and to ask those hard questions. But yes, and I think that really stands in the context of the Farm to Fork strategy, where the Commission has announced that they will be looking at having an European-wide sustainability label for food, and this is something we're very open to and we're very interested in, and we very support that drive towards harmonization, and we're happy to showcase what we've learned with our label and to bring that into the debate. And I understand that the outcome of your data collection will also be presented to the Commission. So I think this is the right approach that we need.
Good. All right. Well, I think this is an interesting question coming off what you were telling us earlier, Julia, about your experiment in your supermarkets by putting two prices, the existing price, but also then the sort of the more true cost price. Because Florence Buchholz asks, what about testing true price buying by consumers by doing it as a genuine retail offer experiment rather than just an intention or a statement of what the true cost might be? Why not actually impose some true costs and see what happens?
Well, this was obviously just a first dipping the toe into the water, and we're continuously looking at what we can do more. Maybe an example that we're already doing, where we're trying to test with the consumer an additional true cost that is happening in the chain, and if the consumer will accept this, is, if I may explain, a project that we have in terms of conversion. So we have a lot of demand for organic products, and we have European objectives for organic, and also in Germany we have a government objective for 30% on supermarket shelves, so it's also an objective for supermarkets. And we're looking for more organic suppliers, and we get a lot of feedback from the farmers that there is an interest, but obviously that time and conversion is a heavy time. It's a financial investment where you cannot yet sell organic, but you have to already undertake those measures, which is more costly. And so what we did is we tried to market these products in conversion. So we pay an additional price premium to the suppliers, which, as an example for apples, is around 20%, of which we pass on a small part to the consumer. And we're having a huge marketing campaign around this in order to explain to the consumer, we have a product that is not organic, but already something additional has been done by the farmer, which should be rewarded. Now we're keeping that lower at the consumer level, but still we see there is an uptake. So we are already testing where we look towards, can we pass that on to the consumer? Can he understand that there's additional measures being taken that are worth that additional price point also?
And it's an interesting experiment. So what was the result? Did you find your consumers were prepared to pay a little bit more, understanding that that apple wasn't officially organic yet, but was on the path to being organic and therefore was worth paying a bit more for?
Yes, from our perspective, this project, and we'll continue to do it, we're adding more products now to that under conversion that we're selling. And for us, the experience was win-win-win. So for the consumer, it's a win in terms of increasing choice, in terms of having that product category between conventional and organic. For us, it is a win because we are securing that organic produce for the future. We see an increasing demand. And for the producer, it's a win because there's a market mechanism where it's not coming just out of the cap, which is also important, but I've heard a lot over here that it also needs to be rewarded by the market.
Hands up anybody who would like to ask a question at this point of our three panelists, because we've got another 20 minutes or so, and I would love to get some questions from the floor. I've got another one on my screen. This one is from Anna Caprile, and it's, would it be right to summarize this issue by saying that food shouldn't anymore be considered as a normal commodity, but rather as a public good with global benefits and costs, which should be spread and borne in a fair manner right across society? Would that be a helpful way of thinking about food and the entire food chain, do you think? Poppy, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I have to say I do agree with a lot of what this question is insinuating, because I think, I mean, if we look at the climate impacts that we're seeing, that's a cost we're all going to have to deal with, and that's stemming from what we are considering a private issue at this moment, food. And I think we need to balance the scales in that respect, and that links very much to what Cleona has been saying, that food is a human right, water is a human right. And I think it's only fair then that we really look at them as a public good, and that will require a huge shift in our economic systems and the value we're placing on food and the externalities. But I think we have to be quite radical in this, because I think we've seen that what we're doing is not working, and the unknown, diving into the unknown, is a scary thing to do, but I think it's our only option. And I think we need all the collaboration we can to achieve that, and to really look at this, for example, as a public good instead.
Anybody else on that one? We've got to stop chuntering myself for a minute and get some questions from the floor. Madam, we'll get you a mic and you go for it. Here's the microphone coming right now.
Thank you. Anne-Sophie Gambo from Denmark. I'm also a farmer. I am quite interested. We have a very resilient system in Denmark for farming. We can be very competitive because we have water, we have resistant soils, and we have good farming practices through a very, very long time. I wonder, will we be awarded for that? Or are we only looking at the changes we make? Because we are already doing a great job, and I would like to see that awarded by the consumers. First of all, I also have one thing, that's who can harvest the CO2? It's us farmers who harvest the CO2. We do it right every year, and we get a huge yield from our farms, and we store an immense amount of CO2. But we have a big problem. Somebody consumes this and get it right out there again, and then we're on it again. So the consumer is the real problem here. It's people eating too much and taking our well-stored CO2 and putting it right out there again. How do we actually do this? How do we actually make people pay for that? And then I really worry about all this labeling. I agree, there are many good things to do, but I really worry about protectionism. We have to look a little bit to the experienced people. I mean, the globalization, the thing that we work with each other and we talk to each other and we trade with each other, that's why we learn a lot about each other. And if we do this, it's all local food, it's all protectionism, it's all the rich countries who can afford to do something about everything. I worry about that too. So I'm just very interested in knowing what your thoughts are on these 2 points.
Mm-hmm. Both interesting. Who would like to respond?
I would like to respond to the mention on carbon farming, and I think that also the Farm to Fork is looking for answers here, and I think it will be, from our point of view, very interesting to see if we can come up with that system, because there is, I mean, we have our CO2 reduction goals, and reduction always has to come first, but there's also a willingness in the chain to invest in additional CO2 saving measures undertaken. And we really believe that because there is not an agreed, legal, certified methodology, there is also some hesitance in the market. There has been some labeling by different retailers, also by us, in order to inform the consumers. And there is a debate on how can that be done in a credible, in a transparent manner. And if we have a set of rules here that allocate that towards farmers that are undertaking these services, then there is a huge interest in the supply chain to invest in that and to communicate about that in a way that it clearly says what this is about, where does the money go, what does it support, and what is the effect of that.
What about waste as a part of this? You were sort of implying that, you know, we eat too much, those of us lucky enough to live in the privileged, rich West, but then, and that's an interesting way of looking at it, but there's also, you know, there is terrible waste built into the system from the very beginning, from the farmyard all the way through the retail chain, and then, you know, to what gets wasted in people's fridges even when they bought the foodstuffs. For you, how much of a priority is trying to eradicate waste?
I think it's a huge priority, because we know in the supply chain, if there's waste, it's not only an ethical problem, but it also means a loss of business,
It's
and
both.
that the structures and the logistics are not working. So part of that organic model is where we are working together with suppliers in our organic selling, that we are looking with them at what are some of the specifications that we have on our fruit and vegetables that is very interesting for them if we get rid of those. And so we have a marketing campaign on that, and we call those organic heroes, that heroes can all look different on the outside. It's really about engaging consumers. And here it's very important to get that into the stores, to get consumers to understand. The other side is consumer education, and I've heard a lot about the psychology behind it. What we are trying as a retailer is to show what are the things that we can do as consumers. So on a lot of our products, such as the milk and the dairy products, those are often longer good than the best before date. So we have campaigns and we have additional labeling on those products that are asking consumers to test and to try this, because it's often longer good. And to really focus in on, I need to look at what I'm buying and to use my senses if I can still eat this and not just waste it because of the best before date.
I'm interested in you just used the phrase consumer education. Just for you two, both of you sort of working in the NGO sector, do you think there is something dangerously sort of patronizing sometimes about this notion of consumer education, when the truth is, I think, if you look at the reality of people's lives, I know this has been borne out in UK studies, a lot of the most disadvantaged, poorest people living in the poorest communities live an awful long way from shops which specialize in selling sustainably produced organic foodstuffs. They live near convenience stores which sell the most basic tin goods and processed foodstuffs at cheap prices, which people can afford, which often are connected to sort of fast food in the kitchen, and telling them, oh, you know, we need to educate you, and if you're better educated, you'll start eating organic stuff, and you'll be healthier, and you'll be doing better by the planet. It isn't really reflecting the reality of their lives, and so is this debate actually sometimes not really talking to a big chunk of our own population? Either of you, I don't know who would like to take...
Sure, I agree with you. I think it's extremely patronizing. Why I mentioned that I don't think responsibility sits at any one specific isolated point on the value chain. It certainly doesn't sit all with consumers. It's across the value chain, and the idea is to elevate the sustainability of the food industry, right? So that's what we're here to do. We're here to transform the food industry. We're not here to educate just consumers and it will be the fix and the solution for everything. It won't. We need to change the way we produce and cultivate food to give people better options, whether or not you live close to a shop, whether or not you have, it has to be a democratic solution that when we talk about transformation, a just transition, right? That has to be part of it, otherwise we're not resolving anything. And when I talk about education as a lever of change, I consider it for all of us. I've been an environmental scientist for 25 years. I'm still learning new things every day with the data that I'm reviewing, right? And I think that policymakers need to be educated because they don't always have access to this kind of data. They don't understand how farms work. They don't understand how consumers work necessarily. So when we talk about education, it's about knowledge sharing as much as putting blame on anyone, right? And bringing discussions and facts out into the dialogue, out into the discussion, so we are actually on the level playing field of what we're talking about. And I was very happy to hear Pavan from Mumbai talk about actual impacts that are happening today and not brushing them under the carpet, right? And linking it to health. He linked it very much, right?
Yeah.
He linked sustainability to health because the health crisis is the climate crisis. But I think that if we're going to be patronizing to any one actor on the value chain, we should be patronizing to all of us because we all have a lot to learn.
I mean, it's interesting, you've been in the food science business for a long time, obviously. And I've been coming to the FFA for at least a decade, and you know, we've been having these debates for a decade and more. Do you think there is some real positive change and momentum, or are we in danger of just having an annual talking shop and nothing much ever changes?
Both. Yeah. I think there's marvelous examples of people doing incredible things. We heard from India. I take your point on Denmark, right? It's a very good point, but there's plenty of other places where good things are being done. What we really have to get better at is sharing and replicating and educating ourselves. And what we definitely need to get better at is bringing different voices into the conversation. So whilst I do believe in good dialogue, there's different voices that are missing from the dialogue to be able to ensure that we're taking everything into account and moving in a systemic direction. So I mentioned different levers of change across tech, across citizen engagement, across education awareness, across policy, for example. All those together are what systemic means, triggering them all at the same time. But one of the things about the label that we're working on is taking action now. It's out there, it's being tested, it's being scrutinized, it's being criticized, and we welcome all of that because it's taking action now. Saying at least let's get out there and try before waiting to be perfect, because if we sit around and talk and looking for perfection, we'll all be gone by that time, right? So we do have to take action, we do have to take some bold decisions, and we do have to get out there and be willing to be exposed to scrutiny and criticism and learn from it as well.
And Poppy, you spoke very powerfully at the beginning about the perspective of your generation, and I'm interested in the initiative that you've been working on with your manifesto, with its ambitious and very hopeful sort of objectives. So, I don't want to be patronizing, but talking to me as a young woman, do you get the feeling that there is traction, that politicians and people who run important retailers and are part of the whole food supply chain are really listening to your voice and the voice of your organization? What kind of experience do you have when you enter this field?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very sure that people are listening. I mean, I see you all in the audience, so I hope that that at least some of our message will stick with you. But I think there needs to be more action, and I really agree with Cleona on this, that there's a lot of talk about what to do, how to do it. But I think at the end of the day, regardless of whether we've worked out the solution perfectly, someone has to bite the bullet and try it. And I think your example in the supermarket where you put the prices next to the true price and the original price was a very good one to get started with. But I think we need to go further than that. And I think people have to understand that this will involve risk. And that's unavoidable, which, in a risk assessment, if a risk is unavoidable, then I know usually that's not the way you want to go. But on the other side of that, we have huge climatic and health risks. So I know it's perhaps not the best options, but we need more action. And I mean, I'm looking at my work in Food Shift 2030, and we work with local innovators across 9 European city regions. And by innovators, I mean people with their own food initiative, grassroots organizations, could be community-supported agriculture programs, people that are making change in their local communities. And these people, they cannot be so easily in touch with people on higher levels. They can shout as loud as they want, but I don't think many of them are sitting here. And that's because the doors don't seem open to them. And I think we really need to dive in to the people that are on the ground making the change, or for example, maybe take a day trip, go and farm for a day and see how it is, go and understand it. Because here's a massive disconnect between what is being decided for the food system and the people that are working on it on the ground. So I really encourage you to get in touch with local people in your community, even a farm shop around the corner. Please go and talk to them and understand what they're dealing with so that we can translate that into the right policy or into the right value development.
Okay, thank you. There's I've got a couple of digital platform questions, but I'm always keen on in the flesh questions. So, oh goodness, there's loads of them. Great. Where are the microphones at the moment? Good. Well, can we get one to this gentleman? Oh, you mean you're a questioner? You're not a microphone wielder. You're a questioner. Right. Well, come on then. Out with it.
Does it work? Yes.
Yes.
My name is Marco de Boer. I'm from Renature. I'm in contact with the farmers. So my question to you 3 is, what is the benefit at farm level of labeling and true cost?
I'm happy to take that question.
Go on then.
I'm so glad, because I'm a big fan of Renature. If you don't know what it is, look it up. Big fan. So what I suggested before is what we're exploring. Traditional labels give all the merit to the product owner, right? And we think the system needs to be disrupted. How do you bring asset and value to the whole value chain, all the way down to farmers? giving merit where merit's due, because they did play a role in generating a good score for a product owner somewhere, down to the way they're investing in regenerative agriculture or in sustainability practices, whatever it is, that merit needs to be recognized as part of the product, right, that the consumer would eventually buy. And we're exploring how to do that, how to bring labeling and certification all the way through each node of the supply chain, each actor in the supply chain, merit where merit's due. I really believe that this will disrupt the way we recognize and give reward, if we want to call it that. And I don't like using the whole system reward, but I kind of like to talk about it as the opposite of greenwashing, right? Giving merit where merit's due. And farmers absolutely do that merit. I grew up on a farm. I know firsthand what it's about. And giving merit where merit's due is important in the whole market piece. And it's not just about the product owner. They rely on a tremendous amount of actors to be able to deliver a good product, if that's what we want to call it. So take your point, and it's exactly what we're looking into disrupting. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Well, that was clear. I know there was a hand up over here. Yeah, good. So you've got the mic. Yeah.
Thanks for already bringing up the viewpoint of the farmer, because I think as things stand from the last decade, we can answer the question on the slide already, and it's simply that the farmer will pay for everything, just like they have been doing for the last decades, right? And the reason is very simple. It's just the price inelasticity of the supply and the elasticity of the price elasticity of demand, right? It's always the same. The farmer makes the investments. For example, the mycotoxins example from the maize from Maxim before. Usually the way it goes is that they find a label, they say, hey, this is a farmer who invested in measures to reduce mycotoxins. The consumer likes it, the supermarket likes it, and they say, okay, let's only sell this kind of maize. And what will happen to the price? It will just drop until it's the same as regular maize, and everybody then invested in these measures. Well, they're screwed, just like they have been over the decades. So I like all of your exploration. Maybe not so much for you, Cleona, because you already hinted at looking at the farmer viewpoint, but maybe for the other two. Is that the consumer, is that maybe a utopia that the consumer will pay for everything, because these core economic issues that are facing farmers are making that they eventually always have to pay for it. So like when you look at these labels that you're thinking about, have you been thinking about, like, okay, how has it been going with labels in history, and always ends up like, now the same with organic, right? The price of organic has been dropping, right? Why? Well, because of the market, and it's just gonna drop until it's the same price as the normal commodities. So have you been thinking about this when looking at your labels, like how can we avoid these core issues? Thank you.
Who would like to take that? Because it's a refrain we hear a lot, that in the end, the farming community always feels shafted. You know, they're expected to do all these things to regenerate and to be committed to biodiversity and sustainability, and it all adds cost to what they do, but they're not getting the payback in terms of higher prices from the supply chain for the products that they produce. And you know, that, for them, makes a lot of this discussion pretty hollow. What's your response? Speaking for a big German retailer.
So I think what you've mentioned is one of the biggest points we need to address, and I think it's something for the entire supply chain, and something where we, as all the supply chain actors, needs to ask ourselves, what do we need to pitch in here? And there is a challenge in terms of price pass-through in the chain. So as a retailer, and I have to explain a little bit longer because it's a little bit more complex, we have direct relationships with farmers, and at a lot of times we are at the end of a very long supply chain. When we stand at a very long supply chain, and this is the same with processors that are facing a very long supply chain, is that we do not have any influence on what the payout price at the farm is. Having said that, we understand that at REWE Group, and I can only speak for ourselves, that things need to change. So we had a huge crisis in the pig sector in Germany because of issues with exports, etc. And really the situations on the farms was very challenging. And we as Rewe Group decided that we need to take an investment into this because there is a farming community and it's struggling and it's part of our supply chain. So we set a guaranteed minimum price for pork. The challenges that we had is we needed very complex contractual structures and we need third-party verifiers to ensure that that minimum price that we're paying is actually ending up in that longer supply chain at the end of the chain. So again, I can only echo what was said by Dirk Jacobs. This is possible if we have our intermediates, and we had luckily enough that were willing to go down that path with us. To check at this, to look at this, at the price pass-through in the chain, because it's very important, like you say, merit where merit is due. In our view, if these measures are being taken, then there needs to be a reward in the chain, and that needs to be passed through in the chain to those that are undertaking these measures.
Indeed, and there's one thing you said that I wasn't quite so convinced by, Ju. You said, when we're stocking foodstuffs that come through a long supply chain where we don't have a direct relationship with the farmer, then we can't really be responsible for the price.
I'm not saying we
paid to
can't
the
be
farmer, but you can,
responsible.
of
I'm
course,
saying
'cause-
it is difficult and we need to change our way of thinking and our way of working with the supply chain.
Yeah, because you always have a
we
choice. You don't have to
have-
deal with these suppliers who have provided, if you do an audit of the entire chain that leads to, I don't know what it is, let's say an aubergine on your shelf in your supermarket, you may not have a direct relationship with the aubergine farmer, but you can audit the chain, and if you don't feel that farmer in the aubergine case is getting a fair deal, you can stop using that supplier.
Well, this is something different in terms of due diligence, but what we're talking about is a price pass-through in the chain when you pay a certain premium. This is not related just to retailers, but also to processors who are willing to do that, is that there are competition or constraints. So we're not just able to say this
but
is
this
what
is
you're
always the problem,
supposed
isn't
to
it?
do.
It's a brutal market out there. And
Exactly, but
yeah,
this is why we're working on those contractual relations, but we need to have a buy-in in the chain, and it's the entire chain, it's the suppliers that we're working with, and people who know the German market, I think we've proven in the last years that we're really willing to put money there, not just words, but to put money there, to invest there. We've shown that with the minimum price for pork, we've shown that with our commitment to local supply chains, and we've shown that with the way that we look at prices in the milk and the egg sector. And it's not a secret that we're paying higher prices here.
Yeah, okay. Well, we've got actually a few questions I'd like to deal with very briefly because we're almost out of time. Has anybody got a hand still raised, or should I deal with these electronic, digital questions? Ma'am, yeah, go on, because give us your question real quick, and we'll go through a few questions all in one go.
Hi, thanks. I would like the panel to take a crack at the question in the earlier panel on the same topic, which is given all that the world has to deal with in terms of the fallout of the Ukraine crisis, impact on global food prices, both now and going forward, right? We're only, I think, roughly 2 weeks in. Clearly, you can see the impact. If this goes on for a year, as some have predicted, possibly longer, and I guess we're all hoping for a miracle, but how does each of the panelists see the trade-offs and the reality in what the middle class and the poor, both in Europe and the world, can stomach? So I totally am on board with, the different perspectives that we have to take, how we have to take care of the planet for the future generation, as well as the current. But I want to hear, ideally, an analysis of the trade-offs amidst current constraints. Thank you.
Okay, well, we have discussed just how difficult the current situation is and how it puts extra pressure on pricing and all of that. Very briefly, any thoughts on the added pressures that come with a world facing a horrible war situation which is exacerbating inflationary pressures, particularly in food, and what the impact of that's going to be? Well, Cleona, we haven't heard from you for a bit. So.
Sure. As she said, I'll take a crack at it. Is a tough question for anyone to answer. My personal opinion, very personal, right, is we are here where we are with the Ukraine situation because we haven't dealt with systemic issues in a systemic way. Nothing we're talking about today we didn't know 50 years ago, and we didn't take action. If we're talking about energy, we're talking about other commodities. So I think we're in a very tough spot where do we stop and do we ask ourselves, when we de-risk, are we de-risking for long-term future? Or are we de-risking for short-term future? I know how we've answered that question over the last 50 years, and it's got us where we are today. So that's my take on it. I think it's a dreadful, dreadful answer. It's like a mother in Ukraine saying, do I leave with my children or do I stay with my elderly parents? That's the situation we're in right now today on these systemic issues. Neither option is fantastic, but that's what we have to face, and we have to think about the long-term future. And Poppy will be here facing this, having the same discussion in 25 years if we don't take bold action to do things differently. That's my take.
Yeah, well, it's well put, and thank you for that. Unfortunately, I'm rubbish as a chairman because I've left several questions hanging, questions that have been put on the digital platform, and unfortunately we're out of time because I know that the schedule means we've got to move on to our next panel. So bad for me, or as my kids would say, my bad. That's down to me. But panelists, you've been fantastic. Thank you very much for all of your contributions. I'm going to, as elegantly as I can, ask you all now to vacate the arena, back to your seats in the auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it from me for now. Thank you, panel.